everyone, and welcome to the EdTech podcast. This past week has been half term for many in the UK and a great chance to recharge the batteries. I spent 3 days in the sea learning how to surf, and I'm delighted to say that in some form or another I got up on the board. Needless to say, there was a lot of falling off and getting hit by waves before that happened. Thanks to Sunny Tan, who left us a listener voicemail this week. Sunny is listening in as a psychology student at the University of York in the UK, aiming to integrate positive psychology back into public Chinese schools after her study and move beyond cramming to motivation in learning. Pretty aspirational stuff, so here she is.
Hi, this is Sunny from Malaysia. I have been following and listening to EdTech podcasts for almost half a year now. Absolutely love the channel and what Sophie is contributing to the ed and tech community. I think this channel really got me to think about how technology can really push education to a whole new level. When I remember when I first heard about how some schools have been using apps that can customize customize homework for students and to decrease the workload for teachers. I just think the entire conversation that Sophie helps bring to help start between people from a tech background and people from an education background, and really building that cohesive picture. I think that's amazing what Sophie is doing. So keep up the good work. I'm excited to hear more from you guys. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sunny. If you'd like to leave a listener voicemail, just go to speakpipe.com/the EdTech podcast. Thank you also to our newest Patreon supporter working under the pseudonym Slarty Bartfast from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fame, who wrote in to say they binge listened to 6 episodes of the podcast over the last week after being recommended by a listener from the University of Portsmouth. So welcome and thank you to Slarty Bartfast for your patron support, and to the Portsmouth Uni listener who recommended you. Brilliant to have both of you checking in. If you'd like to become a supporter of the EdTech podcast, you can go to theedtechpodcast.com and click donate. Sticking on the funding theme, Nesta have just announced their EdTech Innovation Fund, which will provide grants of up to £100,000 for up to 20 organisations to improve, evaluate and grow the reach of digital products across 4 challenge areas. Those being formative assessment, essay marking, parental engagement and timetabling. You can apply for up to £100,000 and the deadline is the 15th of July at 9 a.m. So don't oversleep on that day. What else this week? Google have released an in-browser podcast player, which is great news for the gazillions of you who have an Android phone. We'll spam the link everywhere. And before we kick off, a few event-related bits. If you're listening in real time, I'm going to be attending both Future EdTech and London EdTech Week in London during the next few weeks. There are product discounts for both and all details are in our show notes on the website. If you're not listening in real time, please forget I ever mentioned a thing. Right, that's all of our newsy bits out of the way. This week's episode is a live recording at Wise Paris earlier this year, where we cover T-shaped learners, that's both broad and deep, what Greek mythology can tell us about the modern day role of the mentor, and how formative culture and parents are in the learning journey. Naturally, we throw in a bit of machine learning, investment and pedagogy for a fine recipe for your ears. Stay in touch and have a great week. Good morning, welcome to the Ideas Stage. My name's Sophie Bailey and I'm the founder and host of the EdTech podcast. So today's discussion is on the future of learning, and I'm really delighted to have 2 special guests. The first you may have heard of, Francois Tadai, director for CRE here in Paris, and also an ex-guest on the EdTech podcast, Joel Hellemark, founder of Sana Labs. So without further ado, we'll begin our discussion, and there'll be 10 minutes at the end for questions, and I do encourage you to jump in with many of those. Okay, well, welcome both of you. First first question really is, we're thinking about the future of learning. So what fosters learning and what might hinder learning?
Yeah, so that's a huge question. I think if we look at from our angle, what we're focusing on is essentially how can we bring machine learning to the education industry to drive learning outcomes and engagement. And we focus primarily on the first two steps of sort of Bloom's taxonomy. And when we look at that data, what seems to drive a lot of learning is the curiosity. And it's interesting to look at curiosity from a data point of view. So how could you find curiosity in data? And what we found is that what seems to be sort of optimal for curiosity to drive engagement and learning outcomes is when students have around 70% probability of getting the exercises or the challenges correctly. So it's essentially not too hard, but neither too easy. So I think that's really interesting how we've been able to see how sort of curiosity drives engagement and how curiosity is directly correlated with the difficulty of the exercises.
Okay. And Francois, what's your opinion on this question?
Well, I agree with the importance of curiosity. I would add that motivation is key. And, the motivation can come from curiosity, but it can come from need, it can come from, some interest that you have for a subject. Because, for instance, you are interested in the climate change and you're concerned, and suddenly you want to know. And so I think that one of the things that can be done is to contribute to do something that is meaningful. If what you do is meaningful, then of course you're motivated, okay? And that's typically, the notion of meaning is not necessarily in the center of the stage of the education discussion, unfortunately, too often. But I think we can do this, and I think it's even more important to do it in the age of AI, not only because AI might help us, but also because one of the things that AI doesn't do is define what's meaningful. AI, optimizes, AI analyzes the data, but what this data means for you as human beings is not something an AI can really help you with.
Having spoken to you before last year at South by Southwest, you were very passionate about polymathematical thinking and this idea of, crossing the sciences and the arts. And Francois, I'd love to know more about Cree's kind of perspective on this, and then perhaps we could dig into the future of learning and this idea of, gaining skills and learning across the arts and sciences as well.
Yeah, I think we separated art and science, but great examples of the past have shown us that this is not what we should be doing. If you look at, for instance, the contribution of the best scientists of the 20th century, most of them were also artists. Okay, so I think we have to realize that we have different modes of thinking. Some of them are more logical and rational, and others are more intuitive and maybe artistic. And we should foster both, and we should foster the communication in our own brains between the two, and certainly across brains by inviting artists and scientists to discuss with one another. And so we've launched programs that do exactly this. We have one program that we co-designed in China that's called Open Fiesta. Okay, and it's the Open Faculty for Open Innovation, Open Education, Open Science, Open Technology, and Open Art. Because we want the students to tap into all of those and use it to build projects that are truly meaningful for them and that may relate to the Sustainable Development Goals that are or planetary goals.
So that's interesting. And when we come to questions, I'd love to invite the audience to share any examples of this kind of interdisciplinarity within their own countries. In the UK, we've got more examples of this popping up. So we've got the London Interdisciplinary School set up by Ed Fido, and we've got a lovely acronym NMITE. A big part of both of these is this kind of project-based education and bringing the industry in and sharing ideas, and it being far less about entry requirements and exams at the end of it, but more about kind of learning with industry and with real-world problems. For the London Interdisciplinary School, they're very much about equipping everyone with these kind of global competency skills, as we can call them, and then going into a specialism which might help with thinking about the world's great problems. So I just wondered, how are you both seeing this play out in terms of other projects around the world, and how we might go about developing education to be more inclusive in this way?
So I think we've seen great examples of that both in Sweden and in Finland. And so one program that's run in Sweden is the Model European Parliament. So you essentially work on developing these motions, and these motions require you to combine your expertise in economics, in math, and natural sciences to come up with novel solutions. And if you look at the Finnish school system, they're using the equivalent as well. They're moving away from these sort of artificial separations of subjects. Physics has a lot to do with maths and so forth, and having them in individual subjects really doesn't make sense. So I think Model European Parliament is such a great example of this interdisciplinary work sort of in action.
One example I really love, and unfortunately the friend that is responsible for this couldn't come, the best school in the world, according to the Lego Foundation, is based in Haiti. Okay, so that's not necessarily the place that people would expect by default, but very interestingly, this is a place where it's not that they don't have problems, but they take the problems as a source of motivation for the students. So, for a semester they do relatively classical things, but for the next semester it's only project-based, but not project-based given by adults, it's project-based defined by the children. Okay, and they do this from 6 to 18, and they identify a problem that touched them, and then they look into what science and technology and art and all those combinations can do to have a positive impact on their environment. And this school is for me a model, and I think we need more of those schools. I think we need to create labels of UNESCO, labeling schools that are engaged for the Sustainable Developmental Goals. I think we need a label for universities that want to engage with Sustainable Developmental Goals. I think there is a master in Geneva in Tsinghua, for instance, that is doing. Inviting students to mobilize all the disciplines just to identify solutions. So the students use the discipline as tools, not as aims in themselves. Okay, there are tools to help the students contribute to do something that is truly meaningful and impactful. And if you create a database of those curricula, and you use a sort of a GitHub type of platform in order where you could share those curricula and you could fork them. And you can adapt them to your needs wherever you are. Are you in Haiti, in Sweden, or in Geneva, or elsewhere? Can we globally document this and share it? And I think that students are very motivated by things like that. One of the things that became viral is Design for Change, and Florence, that just talked in the previous panel, is doing the French version of this. But those are programs that invite children to start from something that touched them. And then they have to imagine a solution for this problem that is deeply resonating with them, and then they have to do something about it. They have to implement at least one idea, and then they have to share what they've done. So those are very simple principles, and they develop not only creativity, empathy, critical thinking, but also the ability to cooperate and to learn a lot of basic skills. So you can have all of it at once.
So I think it's really interesting because it's basically putting forward the idea that these collaborative skills, these kind of soft skills, for want of a better term, are really essential to our future learning and future problem solving. But there's quite often this notion that you can't measure these types of skills, which seems, I tend to disagree with, because we know there's studies coming out of Harvard and Cambridge, and there's simulation work which is identifying individual effort in group works as well. So with both of your projects, how do you go about measuring some of those softer skills, and how might those in the audience sort of benefit from these kind of ways of doing so?
So first of all, we don't focus too much on the softer skills with our software. So I think for us it's been important to really limit where we apply our technology, and we focus on the foundational knowledge, the conceptual understanding the core facts, remembering them, retaining, and so on. So that's where we focused to date. However, I see huge opportunity long term to also be able to measure these soft skills. And if we look at education more broadly, one difficulty has been is that we sort of the assessment has been so core. So if we can't assess these skills, they also get sort of hard to implement in the school systems. So I think new measurements. I think if you look at sort of the equivalent of the SAT in 5 years, or 5 to 10 years, it probably wouldn't be SAT, but it would be a measurement, a simulation that could capture much more nuances of the students, their grit, the resilience, the collaborative skills, and so on, which we've seen are so much more important later on in their careers. And I think artificial intelligence can play a big role in capturing these nuances. However, I feel that we're far from there at the moment, and now the first applications we can see of machine learning in education is personalization of these more foundational skills.
I think it's an open question that no one has the answer to. Okay, there is some interesting attempts here and there, but there's still a lot of discussion. But I think what we should do is build a sort of a citizen science approach to it, okay, and invite everyone to say, okay, what are 21st century skills? Because there is so many different lists already. Having is there a consensus or not? Is it regional? Is it depend on the value set that you have and so on? So on the age range of the children and so forth. So I think that's first something. What would there be, and then how would you measure them? Okay, and there could be thousands of ways of measuring them, and there probably no single solution. Even though some people might say my solution has to be best because it's mine. Okay, but can we be a slightly more open conversation around these things? And more generally, I think if you want to investigate the future of learning, you have to ask the learners themselves. How would they want their empathy to be assessed, for instance? Okay, is there a machine to assess their empathy, or is there other ways to do that? And not only assess it, but assess it to help them progress and develop it further. And then I think through maybe simulation games and these sorts of things, you might be able to put them in situations that are a little more realistic than, say, just a quiz, and then maybe measure something like empathy.
I think this is really interesting because, we quite often bandy around sort of the idea of global competencies and so on at these events. And, for many people, actually, it's just about having local opportunity is really essential. If we're thinking about the future of learning, part of that is also, how do we make sure that the technology that, you're using for good doesn't further the gap between the haves and the have-nots? And I'd love to know your thoughts on, how we go about doing that through education as well.
Yeah, so I think the students that are benefiting the most from these applications are actually the students that historically have fallen behind. And it's this whole concept of sort of throughout your school years, you just compound these errors. So if you only pass sort of 70% of your first year and then 70% of the following year, sort of compound these knowledge gaps, really. Whereas with these machine learning systems, you're really trying to teach for mastery. So you're trying to get every single student to 100%. And one difficulty historically is that you don't know what you don't know. But these systems can capture it and then provide you with a personalized curriculum that helps you achieve full mastery. And if we look at most of the research, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has done a lot of research in these aspects. And time and time again, I think where you see the biggest improvements is really in the students that have historically lagged behind. So I think that machine learning in education will be more of an equalizer than perhaps in other industries.
So I would agree with this with one condition. I'll first start with why I agree, and I think that it's not only school curricula that machine learning can help with. I think machine learning can help us explore the future of jobs, for instance. Okay, if there is a new job opportunity, how far are you from that job opportunity in terms of skills and knowledge? Okay, can we have a sort of knowledge map and a GPS of knowledge where you would know where you are in the knowledge space, you would know where there is a job opportunity, and you would know what are the fastest routes that can help you to go from where you are to where you could go. And there might be thousands of ways, and there might be people around you that have done part of that path, and they may want to discuss with you. So that's I agree with this. That can be very positive. But I want to go to the risk. Okay, and the risk is if you make this a private good, then only those that can pay for it will use it.
Yeah.
Whereas education and knowledge should be public goods. So, I have a real issue with this. And, I think it's time to discuss with governments and international bodies like UNESCO and so on to make sure that whatever comes from the best ways of learning would be accessible to everyone on the planet. Because otherwise, you would hugely increase the gap that already exists.
Yeah, and just to build on top of this, I think that's where we're doing a lot of work. So we partner up with big publishers and education companies, but we also provide our technology for free to non-profits. So I think now for the first time, sort of the non-profits of the world are accessing this state-of-the-art machine learning technology. And I think for us, it's really about, so it's like our end game is really personalized education for everyone, everywhere. And I think we could really drive personalization to ubiquity using these technologies, but we have to partner with the right organizations, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, there is so much knowledge on the web. One of the problems is that the quality of what you can find on the web is super heterogeneous. Okay, so sometimes some of the free material is not the best quality. Sometimes it's not true. Say Wikipedia is a good example of the best quality accessible to all. The question is, how do we build on the commons typically and use the sort of strategy that Wikipedia has used and maybe new ones that can help build on the collective intelligence of everyone. Because if everyone contributes to build new knowledge, then everyone should access to it. Okay, and so this way you could really build an infrastructure of knowledge where everyone can access every part of the best dimensions of knowledge. But you have to deal with fake news and all these things, and there might be a solution that also comes from AI and the collective intelligence combined.
So now the real discussion starts. Who has any questions for our esteemed panelists today? I'll take 3 and then we'll answer them in one batch. So who's going to jump in with the first question? Brave soul there.
Hi. Oh, yes. Okay.
It works.
You mentioned the value of interdisciplinary approach to education learning. One problem that I think a lot of people face is it is great to be interdisciplinary in one's approach to learning and research. But when it comes to the job market, people look for purists. People look for people who are intense and narrow in one particular field. So how do you solve this problem from the perspective of job seekers? Because in the interdisciplinary, the market for interdisciplinary is very, very narrow. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think
we take the 3 questions.
Oh,
yeah, we take one more.
Sorry.
Sure. Thank you very much. It's quite enlightening. My name is Edzai. I'm from South Africa. And I just want to find out, Jeremy Rifkin, one of the eminent economists, has been talking about the zero marginal cost of information. And it's driving the network society and the Creative Commons. So in terms of business models for education startups like some of us, where do we stand? I mean, if we are to follow the Creative Commons and GitHub type of models, yeah. So yeah.
Okay, we'll go with those 2.
So I could start. I can start with the first. So if you look at sort of the engineering talent we search for, it's sort of these T-shaped engineers. So I think it's good with people who are specialists, but who also have broad skills. So we look for that combination. Some people who are really strong in particular areas, but also know a bit of all of the other areas as well. And I think that's sort of what we should teach as well. This sort of T-shaped skills. You can go deep into math, but you should also know how it applies to all of these other fields and have a foundational understanding of it. Because if you only know computer science, if you only know math and so on, you can't really make use of it effectively. But you have to understand the applications of it. And then the second question is highly interesting as well, but maybe you want to jump on it.
Yeah, I agree with the T-shape, and I think that we can see skills as dynamic anyway. Okay, and we are lifelong learners, and so you might have a relatively general education to begin with, but whenever it's needed, you should be able to go very deep in what you need to learn, and that could be for the end of your master, your PhD, or because for a specific job you're going to have to go very deep into some specific knowledge that you can add to the general backbone that you built before. And in terms of the economic model, I think GitHub indeed is a very interesting model. As you know, it's free for users that play the game of the commons, and it's only if you want some private services and some privacy for what you do that you will have to pay. And so I think we can do similar things. For instance, the perfect knowledge guide or knowledge mentor / AI that could be built might be free for all learners on the planet. But if you want to use it for a for-profit purpose within a company, then you can sell services to that company, because that company may not want to share their knowledge with all the rest of the world. But a learner that is willing to share their knowledge and their ability to co-construct their own knowledge and the one of the global pool should be have access to it freely. So I think we have to be very creative in those things, and I think public service or taxpayers could be subsidizing some of this. For instance, in France now, every citizen that is employed has 500 to 800 euros a year to spend for their lifelong learning. And so far, they have to spend it in a sort of a fixed set of companies that sell services for training. But I think tomorrow, I would rather pay, I never use this personally, but I would be very happy if I could give my 500 euros to Wikipedia, for instance, or to someone working on Creative Commons that helped me to learn something that was truly useful for me, maybe a blogger or someone like this. So I think we should rethink not only the knowledge society but also the acknowledgement society. Okay, and we should give resource and acknowledge those that help us to learn. And so we have to be creative even in the economic model.
I think that's quite interesting. I was moderating a panel a couple of weeks back, and there was a company there called BitDegree, I think they were called, and it's like a kind of closed kind of peer-to-peer platform between learners and kind of resource developers, essentially underpinned by the blockchain. But my question there was, we've had these kind of before in a more kind of in a less sophisticated way with TS resources. So how do you prevent the resources from sort of fading away and becoming irrelevant? How do we make sure that the community keeps them high quality and monitored in that way?
But I think that's why universities should play a key role. Okay, my problem with universities is that they do research on everything but not on themselves, or very rarely on themselves. Okay, but I think they play a key role in the knowledge society, and they should redesign their own model. Because they are not only knowledge producer and a place to acquire some of this knowledge, but also a place to certify that some knowledge is of higher quality than others. Okay, and so I think that universities at large should play a key role in helping to identify what is the most relevant. Not that they should become a new censorship bureau, okay, but that they should put labels on things in which is truly better from their perspective. And of course, not all academics have the same perspective on the value of any piece of knowledge. So you'll have, open debates, but, you would have the position of any citizen could have their opinion on the quality of knowledge. But, if you are an expert in a field, your weight should be stronger. But if you have a Nobel Prize in medicine, your weight in, say, music doesn't have to be strong.
Unless you're a musical medical person.
Which might happen, because, musical therapy exists.
Yeah. Okay, do we have time for one more? Yep.
Jordan Naidu from UNESCO. My question for both presenters, we've been talking about rethinking learning. One of the keys in the learning process, as we traditionally know, are teachers. There's been a lot of discussion yesterday in a few panels on the role of teachers. Mm-hmm. How do you see the role of the teacher changing. I think this is a question that always plagued us. I can recall I did my own teacher training nearly 40 years ago, and in my undergraduate work, a book that was prescribed, which I think still has relevance today, by Wayne Gartner and Postman, called Teaching as a Subversive Activity. I think we need it even more today. So what's your view on teachers and their role?
So we recently published this case study of how teachers were using our technology in schools, and it turned out these teachers were saving 7 hours a week just on creating assessments, creating these personalized study plans as a function of the assessments. So all those sort of low-level work that they previously had to do, they'd been able to automate with the help of our technologies. What that then freed up more time for is these more critical skills, having group assignments, interdisciplinary work, project-based learning, and stimulating those learning environments. So what I really hope that machine learning could free us up from is these assessments. I think in the future we won't have to do assessments like every third month or so, because the assessments will be continuous. You'll be doing assessments every single day as you interact with the learning material, and then as a function of that, the next task you should work on will be recommended, and that will free up teachers' time to focus much more on this project-based learning, and that's what we saw in this case study in South Korea.
I think what's really interesting about that is on the discussion over here this morning, they were saying that, there's a lot of chat about guide on the side, which is kind of what you're describing. But there isn't actually that much chat about how do you help teachers transition into this. And at the same time, Teacher Development Trust were on this stage, so I'm sure the answer to that question might have been, being discussed here, but it's an important one.
To answer those different points, I think that we should see teachers as learners. And they should be learning all the time. And I think it's true of every one of us. We are all lifelong learners, but teachers have a key role because they are responsible for at least inviting kids to learn how to learn and be able to develop all sorts of critical skills, including critical thinking, for instance. Okay, but creativity, empathy, and all those things. And maybe the last things we learn from a human is how to be a human. Okay, maybe we'll learn everything else from the machine, but the machine won't know exactly what it is to be a human, and so that might be what will be left ultimately, and it might evolve. All of our jobs are going to evolve because everything a machine does better than we do. Maybe we should leave it to the machine, but there is things that we do so much better than machines. We should really focus on those, and we should focus on the complementarities. But that means being able to learn and reflect on what it is to be human. I think we should all ask our question like this, but especially teachers. And where's their added values? And maybe we should go back to the wisdom of the past. We need ancestral intelligence, another form of AI. Ancestral intelligence, and not only artificial intelligence. For instance. In the Greek ancestry, and I'm sure that in the room there is enough wisdom from different cultures that we should be able to crowdsource and combine to go deeper. But the Greek had a fantastic mentor. Mentor is a human being to begin with. Okay, he was the mentor of Telemachus, and he was helping Telemachus survive in a complex environment when he was looking for his father. So I think we need this sort of mentorship. And in fact, Telemachus had some help, because Mentor was also held by Athena, who was the goddess of wisdom and science. So maybe, that's what teachers should be, gods of wisdom and science.
How many people have we got in the room that studied philosophy at any one time? Oh, that's brilliant. So, yeah, you're going to be fine. Don't worry about that. So, do we have time for one more question? Or we have come to an end. So, thank you so much to my wonderful panelists.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. We're busy working out our series calendar for 2019. If you'd like to support a forthcoming series, do get in touch and we can share the details. Bye-bye.